For thousands of years, humans have lived in large groups. We are social animals. This is our greatest strength. It allowed us to build cities, create art, and well, even travel to the moon. But living together in large numbers is not easy. Imagine a city with 1 million people. How do they agree on things? How do they make sure everyone has water? How do they decide who builds the roads? This is where the idea of government comes from. It is a story we all agree to believe in. We agree that certain people have the power to make rules for everyone else. This shared belief helps us cooperate on a massive scale. Governments are actually a relatively new invention in the long history of humankind. For most of our existence, Homo sapiens lived in small bands of hunter-gatherers. There were no presidents, no kings, and no parliaments. Decisions were made within the group, often through discussion and consensus. There was no police force to arrest you and no tax collector to take a part of your hunt. The group was small enough that everyone knew each other. Your reputation was everything. This system worked for tens of thousands of years, but it only worked for small numbers of people who were closely related or knew each other very well. The agricultural revolution changed everything. Humans started to settle down in one place. Villages grew into towns and towns grew into cities. Suddenly you were living next to thousands of strangers. The old ways of cooperation were not enough. To manage these new large societies, humans invented new stories. They invented the stories of gods, of kings, and eventually of nations and governments. These institutions provided a framework for order. They collected taxes to build granaries for storing food. They raised armies to protect the city from invaders. They created laws to settle disputes between strangers. It was a trade-off. People gave up some freedom for more security and stability. So, a government is essentially a system for large-scale cooperation. It is a story we tell ourselves that allows millions of strangers to live and work together towards common goals. It organizes defense, builds infrastructure like roads and hospitals, and creates laws to manage our interactions. Whether it is a monarchy ruled by a king or a democracy where people vote, the basic function is the same. It is the imagined order that holds our complex societies together. Without this shared story, our ability to cooperate on such a grand scale might crumble, forcing us to find new ways to organize ourselves. Imagine waking up one morning in a world with no government. The sun rises, just as it always does. You step outside your home. There are no traffic lights because there is no transport authority to maintain them. Drivers must negotiate with each other at every junction, perhaps with a simple wave of the hand or a nod. There are no postal workers delivering letters, because the National Postal Service no longer exists. If you want to send a message to a cousin in another town, you might have to find a private courier or someone who happens to be traveling in that direction. Your day would be filled with many small, direct negotiations. In your local community, life might be organized around smaller groups. Perhaps your street has a council of neighbors. This council decides when to clean the shared spaces or how to manage the local water well. If there is a dispute between you and your neighbor about a fence, you cannot call the police or go to court. Instead, you might bring the issue to the community council. The elders, or perhaps just respected members of the community, would listen to both sides. Their decision would not be enforced by law, but by social pressure. If you ignore their judgment, you might find that your neighbors are less willing to help you in the future. Work would also be different. There would be no national currency, no pounds or dollars printed by a central bank. People might trade goods and services directly. For example, a baker might exchange a loaf of bread for some vegetables from a farmer, or communities might create their own local currencies, like tokens that can only be used in that specific town. Large companies as we know them might not exist because there would be no corporate laws to create them. Instead, businesses might be small, family-run affairs, or worker cooperatives where everyone makes decisions together. Your economic life would be much more local and direct. As evening falls, you might gather with your neighbors for a shared meal or a community meeting. There would be no national news on the television because there are no national broadcasters. News would travel by word of mouth or through local newsletters. The stories you hear would be about your community, not about far-off political events. Your identity might be tied more to your neighborhood, your profession, or your family than to a country. Life would be simpler in some ways, but it would also demand much more from you as an individual. You would be responsible for your own safety, your own agreements, and your own place in the community. One of the biggest challenges in a world without government would be safety. Who protects you from harm? In our current world, we rely on the police to stop crime and the army to protect us from invasion. Without these institutions, communities would have to organize their own protection. Perhaps towns would form voluntary militias, but this creates its own problems. What if one militia becomes more powerful than its neighbors? What stops it from acting like a gang, demanding resources from weaker groups? Without a higher authority to keep everyone in check, conflicts between communities could easily escalate into violence, with no clear way to achieve lasting peace. Another significant problem would be providing for the common good. Think about large projects that benefit everyone, like building a major bridge, maintaining a national power grid, or eradicating a disease. These things require immense coordination and resources, often collected from millions of people through taxes. In a world of small, independent communities, who would organize such a feat? A single community might not have the engineers or the materials to build a large hospital. Different communities might not be able to agree on a plan. We could lose the ability to undertake the grand projects that have defined modern civilization and improved the quality of life for billions. Justice and rules would also be a complicated issue. Without a single legal system, every community would have its own set of rules. What is considered a serious crime in one town might be perfectly acceptable in the next. This would make travel and trade between communities very difficult. If someone from another town harms you, whose rules apply? How would you get justice? The result could be a confusing and unfair patchwork of local customs. There would be no guarantee of basic human rights, as the very idea of a universal right often depends on a larger authority, like a nation or an international body, to recognize and defend it. Finally, there is the challenge of knowledge and progress. Much of modern science and medicine is funded by governments through universities and research grants. This allows for long-term research that may not have an immediate profit. Without this public funding, scientific discovery might slow down. Who would pay for space exploration or research into climate change? While private individuals or groups might fund some projects, they would likely focus on things that offer a quick return. The collective pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, a hallmark of human progress, could be one of the casualties of a stateless world. Despite the many challenges, some might see great benefits in a world without government. The most obvious of these is freedom. Without laws made by distant politicians, individuals would have complete control over their own lives. You could choose to build your house however you like, work whenever you wish, and associate with whomever you please. There would be no taxes to pay, meaning you would keep everything you earn. For those who feel constrained by the rules and regulations of modern society, this level of personal liberty could be incredibly appealing. It represents a return to individual autonomy. Another potential benefit is the end of large-scale, organized warfare. Most major wars in human history have been fought between governments and nations. States mobilize vast armies and develop powerful weapons to fight other states. In a world of small, decentralized communities, this kind of industrial-scale conflict would be almost impossible. While there might be local skirmishes and feuds, the colossal destruction of a world war would be a thing of the past. Without nations to command their loyalty, people might be less willing to die for a piece of colored cloth or a line drawn on a map. This new world could also foster stronger, more authentic communities. In today's world, we are often connected more to our national identity than to our neighbors. A stateless society would force people to rely on each other directly. Your reputation and your relationships with the people around you would become your most valuable assets. This could lead to a renewal of local culture, traditions, and mutual aid. Instead of relying on anonymous government agencies for help, people would turn to their friends, family, and neighbors. This might create a society that is, in some ways, more caring and interconnected at the local level. Finally, a world without government could spark incredible innovation in social organization. Humans are creative creatures. Faced with the challenge of living together without rulers, we would invent countless new ways to cooperate. We might see the rise of digital networks that allow for direct democracy on a large scale. We might see new types of economic systems based on sharing and reputation rather than money. The absence of a single top-down authority could unleash a wave of social experimentation. This is not to say it would be a utopia. It is simply an idea. The story of government is just one story we have told ourselves. Perhaps in its absence we would begin to tell new and equally powerful ones.